Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for our monthly series on crypto trends is Steven Ehrlich, Director of Research at Forbes Crypto, to discuss how the Taliban resurgence could threaten Afghan school teaching women to code and build Ethereum apps. Steven, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. It's a pleasure to be here.
And tell us about the genesis behind coding for Afghan women.
Right. So this was a really interesting story. There's a woman who I've had the pleasure to know for a few years now. Her name is Farishta Farooq. She's actually an Afghan refugee herself, whose family left the country during the Soviet invasion in the 1980s. Her father was actually a very high-ranking member of the Mujahideen, which was a Taliban precursor, and they were targeted by the Soviets, so they had to leave. Long story short, she ended up studying computer science in Iran, ended up doing a master's in computer science in Germany, moved back to Afghanistan to serve as a professor of computer science. And she ended up moving to New York in 2002 because another NGO that she was starting was based there. But she quickly became enamored with Bitcoin and with crypto and really wanted to help take advantage of some of the new opportunities that opened up when the US invaded Afghanistan to help females and women in Afghanistan learn to go to school, learn to code, become financially independent. And so she started a school called Code to Inspire, which teaches females in Afghanistan, exclusively females, how to code, and in particular, code smart contracts on blockchains, develop applications on top of Ethereum. So it was a pretty inspiring project.
So, Steven, was there trust in the economy and potential for growth while the U.S. was in Afghanistan? Because based on her background, wanting to teach women to code in Afghanistan, that it sounds like they were positive in certain respects.
Absolutely. I mean, when the U.S. went in, I mean, initially the goal was to root out the Taliban, stop them from letting groups like Al Qaeda and other extremist groups use the country as a base to launch attacks externally. But then we moved into the nation building sector and or the phase of sort of the invasion, and billions of dollars of aid through NGOs and government grants flowed into the country. Now, when I spoke with Farishta about this, I mean, she talked about how much money was sort of being airdropped into the country, but she also felt that in some ways it was a bit of a mirage because it wasn't necessarily sustainable. It's kind of the give a child a fish, they eat for a day. Teach a child to fish, they eat for a life type of parable. So she wanted something that was a bit more sustainable, and crypto in particular also was very relevant to the Afghan to women in Afghanistan in particular because it was hard to open up bank accounts, especially for females. Any bank account, anyone that tried to send money into Afghanistan through traditional methods such as wires or Western Unions, the MoneyGrams, often got delayed and were very expensive. So by teaching women to code, and then actually some of the projects that her graduates completed, they were paid in crypto. It helped them gain some financial wealth and also maintain the privacy, because all that they needed was an email address to really set up a Bitcoin account or a crypto account. So it really was very much a win-win type of proposition during the early onset. I believe the school was created in, I think, 2015. So for the first few years, it was a pretty successful venture.
What's the impact of this withdrawal on confidence in the U.S., and what could this mean for the dollar and for crypto?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is where the story gets a little bit sad or unfortunate, because I mean, with the Taliban back on the ascendant, I mean, it's taken over the country. Believe it or not, it controls more of the country now than it did when we first invaded back in 2001. So people are worried if the Taliban are going to restrict or shut down the school, or are not going to let women go back to school. The school is already remote to begin with because of COVID, and they're worried about internet access. And right now all the schooling is remote, but if they cut off the internet to control the information environment, then they have very little luck. Regarding the broader perspective, I'm seeing a lot of questions now, and a lot of people talking about what this withdrawal means for overall faith in sort of like the U.S.'s role as the benevolent global hegemon, and by extension, what this means for the future of the U.S. dollar as sort of the global reserve currency. They're staying with Afghanistan. They're drawing a lot of ties between us and the U.S., the Soviets withdrawal in the 1980s, and how that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the overall collapse of the Soviet Union. I personally, I don't necessarily think that parallel or analogy is accurate. I actually think that as much as this stinks for the U.S. right now, it's going to let them pivot into more important areas from a strategic point of view, such as the Asia Pacific, and then on top of that, with the economy where it is today, with the rising cases of the Delta variant and worries about perhaps going back into another type of lockdown, I think people are going to look to the U.S. again and the dollar by extension for a sense of stability as we try to navigate these uncertain waters.
What are your thoughts around the Jackson Hole Economic Symposium and monetary policy direction and the impact to the crypto space?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting time for us to have this conversation, because at the Jackson Hole Economic Symposium last year is when Chairman Powell really, I think, stunned a lot of people when he said that the Fed was going to be willing to let inflation float above its sort of 2% guidelines for an extended period of time to compensate for the economic drawdown that happened during the early onset of the pandemic. Of course, as we've seen over the last few months, inflation year on year has gone up considerably, 5%. It's basically the highest it's been since 2008. And because of that, a lot of Fed watchers are wondering whether or not the Fed is going to start tightening the screws on the economy, reducing some of its $120 billion a month asset purchases, and then eventually raising rates above zero where they are today. So given that it's sort of the 1 year anniversary of all of this happening, a lot of attention is going to be on what Chairman Powell says and sort of his impressions of the economy. I suspect that given the rising Delta variant and also his belief that inflation right now is a bit transitory and really kind of more due to particular segments like used autos that are sort of disproportionately skewing it, I think he's going to promote patience, but it'll be interesting to see what he says.
All right, Stephen, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks, Jill.